She was halfway through her sentence when he lunged in, voice raised, hand slicing the air like a weapon. "Hold on." Congresswoman Matt Gaetz's tone cracked through the chamber, loud enough to jolt heads up from notepads and phones. The words weren't meant to clarify or question. They were meant to stop, to silence, to claim the floor, not because he earned it, but because he could. The interruption hit like a sudden clap of thunder. A few gasps, a murmur. Reporters glanced up from their screens. Cameras zoomed in instinctively, chasing the energy shift. Gaetz leaned back in his chair, flashing that familiar half-smirk, the kind that didn't seek agreement so much as dominance. He folded his arms like a man satisfied with disruption, certain the moment now belonged to him. Jasmine Crockett froze for a fraction of a second. Not from shock, she'd seen this move before. The sharp breath that followed wasn't fear, it was calculation. Her pen rested gently against her notes. Her eyes didn't drop. She didn't move. Every instinct around her told her to speak, to push back immediately. Instead, she waited. The silence stretched. It wasn't awkward, it was deliberate. Gaetz shifted again, filling the quiet with a smug chuckle. "See, that's the problem," he said, leaning toward his mic. "You start talking and you forget your point." The words dripped with condescension, heavy and intentional, designed to sting. Laughter, forced and uneasy, rippled from one end of the room. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her stillness became its own kind of power. One camera panned to her face. The expression there wasn't anger, it was patience sharpened into a blade. The kind of patience that makes an audience lean closer. Sensing something dangerous behind composure, Gaetz mistook that silence for victory. He leaned back, pleased with his own performance, but the room had already begun to turn. The energy had shifted from his swagger to her stillness, and before the next question could even form, the world watching sensed it too. No one could have predicted how she would answer him next. This wasn't just another hearing. It was one of the most watched sessions of the month, a high-profile review of congressional ethics and accountability. BROADCAST, live across multiple networks. The kind of forum where reputations could rise or crumble in the span of a few sentences. Every member on that dais knew it. Every camera operator, every journalist in the press row felt the tension crackling through the room long before the first gavel struck. The topic was supposed to be dry. Amendments to internal ethics reforms, procedural clarifications, budget allocations. But beneath the formality, something deeper was brewing. The discussion had become a proxy battle over integrity itself, about who deserved to speak for the people, and who was merely performing for them. And if there was one person who thrived on performance, it was Matt Gaetz. To his loyal base, he was a firebrand, brash, fearless, unfiltered. To his critics, he was the poster child for chaos disguised as courage. He didn't just enter hearings to debate policy, he entered them to own them. He relished confrontation the way others relished applause. The raised voice, the smirk, the quick insult, all of it part of a persona built for viral moments. He had long ago stopped caring about persuasion. What mattered was attention. That's what made this hearing feel electric. Everyone knew Gaetz would make it about himself. The question was, who would be his foil? Enter Jasmine Crockett, measured, meticulous, and everything. Gaetz wasn't. Her reputation wasn't built on sound, it was built on results. She came prepared, armed, not with theatrics, but with precision. To her supporters, she represented a new kind of leadership, intelligent, unflinching, principled. To her opponents, she was inconveniently unbreakable. Their collision was inevitable. Two opposite forces meeting in a room wired for spectacle. When Jasmine began her statement, the contrast was immediately clear. She spoke incomplete thoughts, not slogans. She cited facts, not feelings. Even those who disagreed couldn't ignore the discipline in her delivery. And for a few moments, the room actually listened, until Gaetz decided that silence had gone on long enough. He interrupted her not because she was wrong, but because she was right to write, too composed, too unwilling to play his game. His voice cut through hers like a blade meant to slice the rhythm in half. But his timing was off. He thought the interruption would shake her, would derail her calm, and reclaim his control over the room. He didn't realize that his move carried a different weight. This wasn't a backroom exchange. It was a broadcast, every frame, every tone, every micro-expression captured in high definition. Millions of viewers were watching, including those who had grown weary of arrogance masquerading as leadership. Every raised eyebrow, every sigh, every smirk mattered. For a moment, Jasmine sat in silence, not out of shock, but strategy, because she understood what he didn't. When the country is watching, composure becomes its own form of power. In that instant, the stakes multiplied. This was no longer about two lawmakers disagreeing. It was about gender, race, and the performance of power itself. It was about every woman who had been interrupted mid-sentence, every professional who'd been dismissed for staying calm when others shouted. And as the hearing continued, that line, the invisible one between politics and performance, began to blur. Gaetz thought he was controlling the script, but the truth was, Jasmine had already seen the ending. And that's when Matt Gaetz made his first miscalculation. Matt Gaetz didn't walk into hearings, he entered them. Like an actor stepping onto a stage, every stride, every smirk, every gesture was choreographed for an audience he could no longer see but always felt. He'd long ago learned that in modern politics, performance wasn't an accessory, it was the whole show. He understood that outrage got clicks, conflict got airplay, and composure got ignored. And so, he became a master of outrage. For Gaetz, the hearing room was never about governance. It was about dominance. He relished the glare of the lights, the click of cameras, the rustle of journalists preparing to capture his latest moment. He knew exactly when to pause for dramatic effect, when to raise his voice, when to sneer. Theatrics were his currency. Every interruption, every sarcastic comment, every exaggerated sigh was a deliberate note in the performance he'd been perfecting. Since the day he realized politics could be entertainment, he styled himself as the alpha in every exchange, the man unafraid to say what others wouldn't. To his base, that made him brave. To his colleagues, it made him exhausting. But he didn't care what they thought. As long as the cameras stayed pointed in his direction, he believed he was winning. That day, his strategy was no different. The moment Jasmine Crockett began to speak, he saw opportunity, not to engage, but to disrupt. He'd read the playbook: corner, interrupt, overwhelm, create noise, then frame her calm as weakness. When she cited statistics, he rolled his eyes. When she spoke of accountability, he muttered jokes under his breath, loud enough for microphones to catch. Every action screamed, "I'm in control here." But beneath the smirk lay something else, insecurity disguised as swagger. For all his talk about confidence, Gaetz was addicted to validation. He needed the reaction, the laughter, the outrage. Without it, the performance fell flat. Without an audience, the showman didn't know who he was. That contradiction defined him. He preached decorum while embodying disruption. He claimed to defend truth but weaponized distortion. He demanded respect while offering none. And perhaps most ironic of all, he fashioned himself as the voice of strength, while depending entirely on spectacle to appear powerful. Those who knew him personally said he was charming off camera, even disarming. But once the red light blinked on, something changed. His posture stiffened, his tone hardened, and the real person vanished behind a mask of rehearsed aggression. It wasn't authenticity that fueled him. It was adrenaline. Conflict was his oxygen. As Jasmine spoke, his impatience grew visible. Her calm unnerved him. The quiet conviction in her tone clashed with everything he stood for. There was no flash, no anger, no attempt to match his energy. It was a language he didn't understand, one that couldn't be dominated. He shifted in his seat, tapping his pen against the desk, a sign of restlessness, of irritation. He interrupted once, twice, 3 times, each attempt louder than the last. He told himself he was asserting control, but in reality, he was losing it. Her composure exposed his performance. Still, he couldn't stop. He pressed harder, raising his voice under the guise of procedure, using parliamentary jargon like armor to justify disrespect. "Madam, point of order," he began, his tone dripping with condescension. "I wasn't about the order, it was about the optics." He wanted her flustered. He wanted the clip that would make headlines, Gaetz school's opponent. But that's where his arrogance betrayed him. He forgot that the same camera, capturing his smirk, was also capturing her stillness. He didn't realize that every interruption painted him smaller, not stronger. Every sneer, every dismissive chuckle was documenting the unraveling of a man intoxicated by his own performance to see how it looked from the outside. And outside that hearing room, the audience had evolved. Viewers were no longer entertained by cruelty. They were exhausted by it. They didn't see bravado, they saw bullying. They didn't see confidence, they saw fragility wrapped in noise. By the halfway point of the session, even his allies avoided eye contact. They'd seen this version of Gaetz before, the one who mistook arrogance for dominance and couldn't tell when the act had gone too far. But he was too deep into character to stop now. Every word from Jasmine that followed his interruption felt like a threat to his control, and so he doubled down louder. Sharper, crueler. To him, this was still theater. To her, it was real. And that difference would prove fatal. The more he talked, the more the room turned. The more he pressed, the more she seemed and somewhere between his mock laughter and her measured silence, the power dynamic began to shift. Matt Gaetz had entered the hearing to dominate. By the time the exchange ended, he would become something far more revealing, a symbol of how arrogance, once unchallenged, can implode under its own weight. And when it did, the audience wouldn't cheer for him. They'd cheer for the one person who refused to play his game. Long before Jasmine Crockett ever sat behind a congressional microphone, she learned how to hold her own in rooms that weren't built for her voice. She didn't come from privilege, nor from a family of political insiders. Her story began somewhere far more grounded in the working neighborhoods where people believed in effort over entitlement. And respect wasn't given because of your title, but because of your character. Her parents taught her early what fairness looked like, and how often it was denied. Her mother, a teacher who spent her own paycheck on classroom supplies, showed her that service meant sacrifice. Her father, a mechanic who worked double shifts without complaint, showed her that pride wasn't arrogance, but dignity earned through consistency. From them, Jasmine inherited two gifts, empathy and endurance. When others argued to win, she argued to understand. That habit, the discipline of listening, became her quiet superpower. Law school refined what life had already begun teaching her. She wasn't the loudest student, but she was the most prepared. Every class, every case file, every debate, Jasmine showed up ready to dissect not just what was said, but why it was said. When professors challenged her, she met them with logic so sharp it stunned the room into silence. Those who underestimated her learned quickly that her calm was never the absence of power, it was control perfected. After graduation, she didn't chase the spotlight of corporate law firms or high-paying partnerships. She went home. She opened her own practice, defending those who couldn't afford representation, mothers fighting eviction, teenagers caught in a justice system built to forget them, veterans buried in bureaucracy. Her office wasn't glamorous. It smelled faintly of coffee and copier ink, and the waiting room chairs wobbled slightly. But her clients didn't care. They came because she listened. She gave them something the system rarely did: respect. In those courtrooms, she learned what patience really meant. Judges cut her off. Opposing counsels mocked her tone. She didn't react, she responded. Every time someone tried to shake her, she grew steadier. Every setback became a study in restraint. And slowly, case by case, she built something no one could fake: credibility. When Jasmine ran for Congress, she didn't enter politics as a performance. She entered it as a continuation of her mission. Her campaign didn't promise easy victories or flashy slogans. It promised honesty. She walked door to door, not with rehearsed speeches, but with questions. She listened more than she spoke. She built trust the same way she built her arguments, piece by piece, with care and evidence. That's why, when she first arrived on Capitol Hill, her colleagues were divided about her. Some dismissed her as too quiet, the kind of freshman representative who would fade into the background. But that was their mistake. Jasmine was studying the room, learning the rhythms, the personalities, the politics. She didn't need to shout to make an impression. She needed one decisive moment, and she knew one would come. In hearings, she prepared like a strategist, not a performer. Before each session, she spent hours poring over documents, statements, and precedents. She anticipated interruptions before they happened. She wrote her questions 3 different ways: one for logic, one for tone, one for timing. Her legal training made her surgical. Her humanity made her unforgettable. Her staff often marveled at her calm before a hearing. Where others paced or rehearsed, Jasmine sat quietly, breathing slowly, reviewing notes as if she were meditating. She goes still before the storm, one aide said once, and it was true. Stillness, for Jasmine, wasn't passive, it was armor. The world often mistakes gentleness for fragility, but Jasmine understood its true strength. The louder someone became, the calmer she grew. Her ability to stay composed under fire didn't come from luck, it came from experience. She had been underestimated in every space she'd entered, in classrooms, in courtrooms, in politics. Each time, she had turned doubt into discipline. It wasn't that she didn't feel anger, it was that she refused to let anger control her. When others tried to provoke, she listened for truth beneath the noise. When others raised their voices, she measured their motives. That's what made her dangerous to people like Matt Gaetz. He thrived on emotional chaos. She thrived on intellectual clarity. His fuel was reaction, hers was restraint. To her supporters, Jasmine represented something rare in modern politics: composure with conviction. 2 young women watching across the country, she embodied proof that strength could look graceful. And to those who underestimated her, she became a mirror reflecting their own insecurities back at them. She didn't want power for its own sake. She wanted purpose. Her ambition wasn't to win arguments, it was to elevate the conversation. That's what made her opponents uncomfortable. They couldn't lure her into shouting matches because she understood something fundamental: once you let them dictate your tone, you've already lost the message. That's why, when Gaetz cut her off that day, she didn't react. She recognized the tactic instantly: the raised voice, the interruption, the smirk meant to provoke. She'd seen it all before. Judges had done it. Opponents had done it. Critics had done it. Every time, she had met arrogance with elegance. Because Jasmine Crockett knew the one truth that separated leaders from performers: noise fades, integrity echoes. And as she sat in that chair, pen resting between her fingers, eyes locked on the congressman who mistook interruption for control, she didn't feel intimidated. She felt ready. She had faced louder men before, but never one this desperate for attention. The rhythm of the hearing fractured into chaos. What had begun as an exchange of policy turned into a performance of power. Every time Jasmine opened her mouth, Matt Gaetz was already leaning forward, waiting to interrupt, not to debate, but to dominate. She would begin a sentence: "Mr. Chairman, what the American people deserve too," and there it was. "Excuse me, Congresswoman, but let's not waste everyone's time," he barked, his grin tightening into something closer to a sneer. The room shifted. A few murmurs. A pen tapped nervously. A staffer looked down, pretending to check notes. It was the same discomfort everyone felt watching someone push too far in. public, a kind of second-hand embarrassment for the bully who didn't realize how obvious he'd become, but Gaetz kept going. Frankly, he said, I don't think you even understand what's at stake here. He leaned back, gesturing to the crowd as if performing for an audience. The smirk, the sarcasm, the exaggerated size, all of it textbook Gaetz. Every interruption more transparent than the last. He wasn't defending a principle. He was chasing a moment. Jasmine didn't take the bait. Not once. She waited each time, poised, her fingers folded neatly over her papers. The longer she stayed silent, the more powerful her stillness became. Her restraint wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Because, in that silence, the imbalance grew visible to everyone. He pretended not to notice. Go ahead, he said finally, dripping sarcasm. Let's hear your feelings on it. A few heads turned his way, eyebrows raised. The condescension was so thick it hung in the air. He didn't care. He laughed, a sharp sound meant to fill the room, but the laughter fell flat. Jasmine inhaled once, her composure unshaken. If you'll allow me to finish my thought, please. He cut in again, louder this time. By all means, finish. The cameras caught everything. Her calm face framed beside his restless movement. Side by side, it looked like two different worlds, one steady, one unraveling. Inside the chamber, the tension thickened. Even the chair hesitated before intervening. The gentlewoman has the floor, they said softly, trying to restore balance, but the damage was already visible. The hearing no longer felt like debate, it felt like a test of endurance. Gaetz leaned forward once more, arms crossed, voice booming. You know, Congresswoman, if you'd focus more on facts and less on. He stopped himself just long enough to make it sound like restraint. The implication was enough. The insult was clear. It was the kind of moment that made people watching at home sit forward in disbelief. Viewers who had been multitasking now stared at their screens, frozen. The disrespect wasn't subtle, it was blatant, and Jasmine's restraint only made it more glaring. He chuckled again, low and dismissive, shaking his head. I'm sorry, I just can't take this seriously. She turned her gaze toward him, calm and unyielding. It wasn't anger in her eyes, it was recognition. The kind of look that says, I've met your kind before. For a heartbeat, the air stilled. Even Gaetz seemed caught off guard by her silence. It wasn't submission, it was power choosing its moment. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice. She let the weight of his arrogance hang heavy in the room, waiting for it to collapse under its own size. The silence began to feel uncomfortable for him. He shifted in his chair, forced another smirk. Go ahead, Congresswoman, he muttered, almost taunting now. Finish your performance. It was too much. The crowd stirred. Someone coughed. A reporter's pen stopped mid. The tension had hit its ceiling. Jasmine straightened her papers, adjusted her mic, and finally spoke, her voice measured, steady, cutting clean through the noise. Mr. Gaetz, she began, you've interrupted me 3 times, dismissed me twice, and questioned my seriousness once. I've let you have your say. Now, you're going to listen. The room froze. He blinked, caught between defiance and disbelief. And in that moment, everyone watching in the room and across the country knew the dynamic had shifted. Asterisk, he thought the last interruption would shut her down. He had no idea what was coming. The room was still, charged with that strange kind of silence that feels alive, the kind that hums right before a storm. Jasmine Crockett didn't move right away. She simply looked at Matt Gaetz, her expression unreadable, her voice still quiet, almost measured. Mr. Gaetz, she said evenly, you've had your say. The words weren't loud, but the authority in them was unmistakable. Her tone cut through the air with the clarity of someone who didn't need volume to command attention. Cameras refocused. Staffers froze, even the shuffle of papers ceased. She leaned forward, just enough to close the distance without breaking decorum. I came here, she continued, to talk about ethics, integrity, and the responsibility we all share as public servants. But instead, we're here again, watching the same theater that's made people stop believing in this institution. Her eyes never left his. The pauses between her sentences were deliberate, calculated. Each one landed heavier than the last. Every time you interrupt, she said, you prove the very point I was trying to make, that too many in power confuse volume with value. Gaetz shifted in his chair. His smile twitched, but it didn't reach his eyes. He looked like a man trying to laugh off a feeling he didn't recognize. Unease. Jasmine went on, voice steady as stone. You call it debate. You call it passion. But what it really is, Mr. Gaetz, is distraction. And America is tired of being distracted. A ripple of movement swept through the gallery. A shared exhale, like the release of tension everyone had been holding in. Jasmine's cadence was slow, precise. Every word sharpening the contrast between her calm and his chaos. You don't interrupt me because you disagree, she said. You interrupt me because you can't stand that I'm not playing your game. The room stirred. Someone whispered to a colleague. Another reached for their phone. Every syllable from her lips landed like a drumbeat, quiet but unmistakably final. Gaetz tried to cut in again, leaning toward his mic with a smirk that faltered halfway. Now, hold on. Jasmine didn't even turn her head. No, Mr. Gaetz, she said softly. This time, you hold on. The pause that followed wasn't empty. It was seismic. For years, she continued, you've turned these hearings into performances, moments for headlines instead of solutions. You call it leadership, but it's really choreography. And I'm not here to dance. The smirk was gone now. Gaetz blinked, his hand resting awkwardly on the desk, searching for composure he couldn't find. Jasmine looked around the chamber, her gaze sweeping over the committee like a slow-moving lens. Every person watching this knows what this is. They've seen it before, in boardrooms, classrooms, courtrooms. Someone tries to silence someone else, not because they're wrong, but because they're right. Her voice softened, gaining weight with every word. But here's what's different today. You can't silence a truth that's already on record. She tapped the papers in front of her, the faint thunk echoing like punctuation. Gaetz swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the cameras, as if realizing for the first time that the same lens, capturing his confidence now, recorded his unraveling. You wanted a moment, she said, and now you've got one. She paused again, letting the line breathe. The silence grew thick enough to hear the creak of chairs as people leaned closer. But let me be clear, she continued, this isn't about me. It's about the millions watching who know exactly how it feels to be interrupted, talked over, dismissed. Every teacher, every nurse, every worker who's been told their time doesn't matter. I'm speaking for them now. For a second, the only sound was the hum of the microphones. Gaetz's pen slipped from his hand and rolled against the desk. She leaned forward slightly, her tone now almost tender, but with an edge sharp enough to cut glass. You cut me off because you can't keep up. The line hit like a thunderclap. The gallery gasped. The sound engineers, the reporters, even the guards at the door felt it. That perfect collision of truth and timing that turns an exchange into history. For a moment, no one moved. Gaetz's face went blank, the smirk fully gone now. He blinked twice, lips parting, as if to respond, but nothing came out. His hand hovered over the microphone, then fell away. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She sat back, composed, the picture of quiet certainty. Her eyes returned to her notes, signaling the conversation was over. That silence, that beautiful, heavy silence, said everything words no longer needed to. Across the country, people watching the live stream started to react in real time. Texts flew, clips were saved, captions written. Commentators would later call it the moment dignity went viral. But inside the chamber, it wasn't social media yet. It was just stillness, the kind that lingers after a truth has landed too hard to ignore. The chair finally spoke. The gentlewoman's time has expired, came the soft voice, but even that sounded hollow after what had just unfolded. Gaetz straightened his tie, face flushed, forcing out a laugh that fooled no one. Jasmine didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She had already said everything that needed saying. Someone in the gallery whispered, "That's going to be everywhere by morning." They were right, because that single line, "You cut me off because you can't keep up," was more than a comeback. It was a reckoning. It distilled every frustration, every interruption, every quiet moment of disrespect that millions had endured. And in that instant, Jasmine Crockett became more than a congresswoman defending her time. She became a voice for composure, a symbol of power that doesn't shout, a reminder that sometimes the loudest sound in the world is the one that comes after you refuse to bow. The microphones buzzed softly, waiting for the next speaker, but no one dared follow her. The floor was technically open, but spiritually, it belonged to her. Now, outside, the world was already beginning to react. Screens flickered, headlines forming, captions drafting. But in that room, for one perfect moment, the world stopped moving. And at the center of it all sat Jasmine Crockett, unshaken, unbothered, and unforgettable. By the time the sun rose over Washington, the moment had escaped the confines of Capitol Hill. The clip, that single, flawless exchange, had already taken on a life of its own. It was everywhere, every platform, every screen, every conversation, the kind of viral wildfire that no strategist, no press team, no spin doctor could ever contain. The hearing that had begun as just another day in Congress was now the headline of the nation. Networks replayed the moment with breathless commentary. Did you see how she looked at him? Watch her timing, that pause before the line. Analysts broke it down like a championship play, frame by frame, beat by beat. One called it a masterclass in grace under fire. Another said, it wasn't just a takedown, it was a cultural correction. Asterisk, the news cycle couldn't let go. Morning anchors smiled through their introductions. Well, America found its new favorite mic drop. On late-night shows, comedians tried to reenact the look Jasmine gave right before delivering her final line, but even their jokes landed as applause. What people admired wasn't the punchline. It was the poise. She hadn't humiliated him. She had elevated the standard. And online, it was unstoppable. Within hours, edits of the clip flooded timelines, slow-motion replays, cinematic music, captions that read, "Dignity wins again." People across the country clipped and shared it not as gossip, but as validation. The comments beneath told the real story. "I've been cut off in meetings like this my whole career." She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She just ended him. That's what control looks like. It wasn't just political anymore. It was personal. Teachers played the clip for students. Workplace coaches referenced it in seminars about composure under pressure. Even in households where politics usually started arguments, families found themselves united, replaying that one quiet sentence like a song everyone knew the words to. Meanwhile, Matt Gaetz was discovering what every showman eventually does. Once the audience stops laughing with you, they start laughing at you. His staff rushed to control the fallout. Carefully worded statements about spirited exchanges and robust debate. But the damage was done. The more he spoke, the worse it sounded. Every attempt to justify himself only highlighted the insecurity that Jasmine had already exposed. In interviews, journalists asked him if he regretted how he handled the moment. His rehearsed grin never reached his eyes. "I think everyone's passionate about their work," he said, trying to sound magnanimous, but no one believed him. The world had seen what passion looked like, and it didn't look like mockery. It looked like Jasmine Crockett. Within 24 hours, she'd become a household name. Not for scandal, not for spectacle, but for self-control. Commentators began calling her the voice of composure. One column in The Atlantic read, "In an age of noise, she reminded America what clarity sounds like." And in a culture that often rewarded the loudest person in the room, that felt revolutionary. By the second day, her staff couldn't keep up with the flood of emails. Letters from strangers arrived, some handwritten, others typed in all caps, thanking her for the dignity she carried. Women wrote that they'd watched the clip on repeat before job interviews, board meetings, and tough conversations. Men wrote that they'd shown it to their daughters. And in one viral comment that seemed to capture the national mood, a viewer wrote, "She didn't need to shout to win. She just had to stay still long enough for arrogance to collapse under its own weight." That was the ripple. Jasmine's restraint had turned into reflection. People began re-examining their own interactions, the times they'd been dismissed, the times they'd chosen silence over shouting. For once, restraint looked powerful. It looked like progress. In a country fatigued by outrage, she had given the audience something different, relief. The kind that comes when someone finally proves that calm can win, that intellect can outlast insult. She didn't just restore faith in one politician, she restored faith in the possibility of decency itself. And in that way, the clip became more than viral. It became symbolic, a small, elegant rebellion against everything people hated about modern politics: the noise, the cruelty, the spectacle. Jasmine Crockett hadn't gone viral because she destroyed someone, she went viral because she didn't need to. That night, as another round of broadcasts replayed the clip under the headline, "When Calm Conquered Chaos," one commentator summed it up perfectly. She didn't win the moment, she redefined it. And across the nation, millions nodded, seeing in her not just a congresswoman, but a mirror. The interrupted professional, the underestimated voice, the person who stayed steady when someone else lost control. Her silence had spoken for them all. When the headlines faded and the hashtags slowed, what lingered wasn't the clash, it was the contrast. Two approaches to power had shared the same stage that day, one fueled by noise, the other by grace. And as the echoes of that exchange continued to ripple across the country, people began to realize that Jasmine Crockett's victory wasn't just political. It was cultural. Her composure had revealed something essential about this moment in America, a hunger for leadership that doesn't rely on outrage to prove strength. For too long, public life had rewarded those who could speak the loudest, interrupt the most, insult with flair. But in that hearing room, the performance cracked. The script of arrogance failed, and for the first time in a long time, dignity stole the spotlight. What Jasmine embodied was more than restraint. It was evolution. The world watched a woman refuse to descend into pettiness, and, in doing so, redefine what power looks like. She didn't win by outchelling her opponent or matching his aggression. She won by being immune to it. In an age when anger is currency, she chose composure as her weapon, and it was devastatingly effective. That's why the moment resonated so deeply. It wasn't about a man being silenced. It was about a mindset being exposed. Matt Gaetz had walked into that room, believing control belonged to the loudest voice. Jasmine proved it belonged to the clearest one. And in that reversal, something shifted not just between them, but in the collective understanding of what leadership could be. Because America, at its best, has always celebrated grace under fire. The quiet resolve of Rosa Parks, the measured courage of those who refused to retaliate when it would have been easier to rage, the strength of those who stand their ground without ever raising their voice. Jasmine's moment stood in that lineage, a reminder that restraint isn't the opposite of strength. It's its highest form. It's easy to confuse aggression for confidence. It's easy to mistake performance for passion. But Jasmine Crockett showed that real conviction doesn't need to announce itself. It radiates from the calm of someone who knows they're right, and doesn't need permission to speak that truth. For millions watching, her composure became a form of validation. It told them that their patience wasn't weakness. Their professionalism wasn't passivity. Their decision to stay poised when others shouted wasn't surrender, it was strategy. And that message, subtle but seismic, carried far beyond politics. Teachers carried it into classrooms. Parents repeated it at dinner tables. Professionals carried it into meetings where their ideas had been ignored one too many times. Her grace became a template for power that doesn't bruise, power that doesn't degrade, power that endures, because arrogance burns hot and fast, but it burns out. Grace, on the other hand, leaves a glow that lasts. It's the difference between being remembered for noise and being remembered for impact. In the days that followed, journalists kept calling it a moment, but maybe it was something more, a turning point, a reminder that the future of leadership doesn't belong to those who can dominate a microphone, but to those who can command a room without shouting. That day, Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend her right to speak, she reclaimed the meaning of strength itself. She proved that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it breathes. Sometimes, it listens. Sometimes, it waits for silence, and then fills it with something undeniable. Her victory wasn't over Matt Gaetz, it was over the idea that cruelty equals control, and that's why. When people look back on this story, they won't remember the interruption. They'll remember the calm that followed it, the moment a woman refused to bend, and the world stood still to witness the power of grace. Because real power doesn't shout, it stands, it's ground, and that's how it happened. The moment that turned a congressional interruption into a national revelation. Matt Gaetz cuts OFF Jasmine Crockett. Her comeback silences the entire room. Wasn't just a headline, it was a declaration. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just stand her ground for herself. She stood for everyone who's ever been talked over, dismissed, or underestimated, and chose poise instead of panic, confidence instead of chaos. She reminded us that grace isn't compliance, it's defiance, refined. That day, when the cameras caught her calm and the microphones captured her words, something bigger than politics took shape. It was a movement, one built on the simple, radical idea that dignity can still win, that you don't need to shout to be powerful. That truth, when spoken with clarity, can silence a room built on arrogance. And now, that movement belongs to us, to every teacher, nurse, creator, and dreamer who knows what it means to be interrupted and keep speaking anyway. To everyone who believes that justice and composure aren't opposites, they're allies. So when life tries to cut you off, when noise tries to drown you out, remember this moment. Remember Jasmine Crockett. Remember that calm isn't surrender, it's control. If this story moved you, share it. Be part of the message. Because every time we celebrate dignity, we make space for more of it. Every time we stand up for respect, we push the world a little closer to balance. She showed us how it's done. Now, it's our turn to carry it forward, to stand, to speak, and to remind the world. You can cut us off, but you can't keep up.